We're on the air again with another edition of Pachios on the News. Thank you all for watching. I should wave to all my friends that, well, I do have some friends that watch this. So, tonight, we have a guest, very interesting young man. His name is Marpheen Chann. I've read about him in the local newspapers because he's been active and locally. He's on the Portland Planning Board. He was elected as an at-large member of our new commission, Charter Commission, and they're hard at work. And somebody said to me, you know, you ought to get this guy on. He's a very interesting guy. He's an independent thinker, and he might have something interesting to say. So I invited him. Welcome, Marpheen.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I've been sitting here before we started the show asking Marpheen about himself because he has a very interesting background. Born in California, Cambodian parents?
Cambodian parents, yep.
Who were Cambodian refugees?
Yes.
And
yep.
Where did they go to in California?
When they first arrived in the Sacramento-Stockton area, which was initially where a lot of the refugees were resettled, after I was born, though, we moved down to San Diego until about 96 when we moved to Portland.
You moved to Portland in 96?
Yeah.
And later, I guess because of difficulties in your biological family, you were adopted.
Yes. When we moved to Portland in 96, lived near the Portland High School. My mom peeled off from my grandmother and aunts and uncles. We lived in Riverton Park for about a year, 98, 99. And I think just being on her own, she was a single mother, you know, had boyfriends come in and out, dealing with a lot of trauma from the Khmer Rouge or the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. And so she just couldn't take care of us. And the state figured it out. You know, we're visiting, was trying to help her, but eventually split me and my three younger siblings. There were four of us by that time. The two youngest went first into a foster care system.
In other words, they became wards of the state?
Became wards of the state, and they were bouncing around for the few years. And then me and my sister Tanya, we're the two oldest, we then got placed in foster care in 99, shortly before my 2000, because I remember with our first foster family, we were watching the George Bush race there.
So, so how old were you when you went into foster care?
I was 8, about to turn 9. So a lot of these transitions happened to whether DHHS knew it or not, happened to happen around my birthday. So for me, my birthdays are sort of cathartic. Yeah.
Changes in your life.
Yes.
Major changes in your life. And then ultimately you were taken in by a family in Wyndham, right?
Naples.
In Naples, yeah.
In Naples, the Berries, they had my two youngest siblings first. They heard about what me and my sister were struggling with in one of our foster families. She was a single foster mom. She was working with special ed kids. And then to come home and to deal with two foster kids, you know, you can imagine the hardship there. So I have a lot of empathy for her, but at the same time, things would have turned out differently had she gotten her way. Me and my sister Tanya would have been split up. I was dealing with a lot of childhood depression, trauma, as you can imagine, from the foster care system. And she was pressing to put me in a mental health ward or children's mental health hospital. And so when the Berry family found out about that, they were like, no. All they need is, you know, love, a household, food on the table, support. And so they found a way to get me and my sister Tanya reunited with our two younger siblings. We had about a 2-year trial period where we moved in with them, lived with them, and then we officially got adopted in 2005. Yeah.
So these are people with a lot of love.
A lot of love, yeah.
And you told me because you told me you were a Democrat, and you said that your adopted family were conservative, religious conservatives, and Republicans.
Republicans, evangelical, fundamentalists, to the bone, and that's how I was raised, and that's what I believed in middle school and high school. The struggle for me was, okay, I got thrust into Western Maine, lots of, it's rural, not very many Asian people as well, and also the part of me was, how do I show gratitude to people that basically, plucked us out of a bad situation and did everything to give us, an ordinary American life. I took a lot of piano lessons, and music became my outlet for a lot of the issues I was dealing with. And then soccer practices, driving around. And Naples is about 30 minutes from Wyndham, where our school was, our Christian school that we were enrolled in.
You went to a Christian school?
A Christian academy, correct. That was a part of the same church that we went to, a Pentecostal church. And so to go 30 minutes back and forth twice, 3 times a day, that was a lot of money, a lot of gas, especially in the later 2008, 2009.
But it was important to your family.
Yeah, it was. And we got, ironically, even though they were Republican, we got a lot of support from the state.
Yeah.
Adoption subsidies, things of that nature.
Interesting. And then you went to the University of Southern Maine?
Eventually,
where'd you go first?
Yes. So when I graduated from high school, I went to Valley Forge Christian College.
Christian College in Pennsylvania?
In Pennsylvania, Bible College, which is now the University of Valley Forge. And that's where, ironically, I decided to stay during my winter break there rather than to go home, because I needed the space to think about, coming out of the closet, because I was in the closet all through middle school and high school.
So you knew you were gay?
I knew I was gay.
Yeah.
And I resisted it, and I dug in my heels with the whole Christian thing, because part of it was to hide, but part of it was what I was surrounded with. And so I did believe it. And that winter break was, like I told you before the show started, was my winter at Valley Forge, where I was staying up late at night, staring at the ceiling, taking walks in the middle of a snowstorm, just really wrestling with the idea of God and whether God actually hated gay people. And later that spring, I decided I'm not going to stay here at this Bible college. I'm going to transfer to USM. I'm going to major in political science, and I'm going to come out when I head home.
And you did?
And I did.
And you had to deal with the people who loved you? And,
just like any family, disagreements, a lot of arguments, heated arguments. I was not a rebel in high school. And so that was also the period of time when, I started to, party and hang out with friends and go to the sand dunes in the middle of the lake to have a bonfire and drinks. And at one point, my dad said, if you don't stop doing that, I'm going to call the cops on you. Yeah. But in the back of my head, I was just like, Dad, you're not going to do that.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. So now you're important. You work for Good Shepherd Food Bank.
Good Shepherd Food Bank, yep. I'm one of the community impact managers.
What does that mean, community impact manager?
Yeah, so the Good Shepherd Food Bank, like many, many organizations, are taking into account diversity, equity, and inclusion. How do we put that into practice? Beyond the scholarly ideas and the words, how do we put that in practice, and especially in terms of how our resources are distributed and funds and food. And so part of my job is to work with my colleague, who's also a community impact manager, to build relationships with immigrant communities, with Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, to say, hey, we're here for you. Let us know what you need. How can our system work better for you? Where can we break down some barriers that are keeping people away from accessing the food and the resources they need. And one of the things that's come up that's really important for my job is culturally appropriate meals. Especially for me, having grown up in my early childhood as the son of Cambodian refugees, I was eating Cambodian food, lak lak, which is lettuce and beef with a nice sauce, things like rice, things of that nature. But when I was put into foster care, the other part of the culture shock was all of a sudden it was, mind you, good stuff, mac and cheese, crumbled Ritz crackers. My first foster mom loved to do that. Shepherd's pie, lots of milk, which I didn't grow up drinking a lot of milk up until age 9. And on top of the stress and the trauma from being separated from family, your gut is also sort of wrenched away from what you were eating to eating something totally different. And
So at the food bank, you worry about that stuff?
I worry about that stuff, yes. So culturally appropriate food, especially for the African refugees who are arriving.
Yeah, but let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
And I always ask questions to provoke answers.
Yeah.
My family were immigrants.
Yeah.
But they were European immigrants. They came from small Greek mountain villages, and so they had a little bit easier. But it wasn't easy, and they were poor when they got to this country. And they were Greeks. Nobody worried about if they were hungry, what they were going to. If they give them a hamburger, they didn't worry about whether it was Greek food. How about a Greek hamburger?
Yeah.
No, there was none of that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's important to feed the people first.
Yeah.
And so, being provocative,
Yeah.
I hope the priority is not to feed them their appropriate ethnic meal. It's to feed them.
Yes. So number one is got to feed them. But I think number two is where the culturally responsive way is, okay, we don't just want to, where the food bank was, I believe 10 years ago, was they just took whatever food was donated to them. So the old Hannaford muffins, the old, junk foods, bakery foods, outdated food.
Yeah.
But our president, Christian Meal, shifted that framework along with the board to focus on nutrition. And how do we provide nourishing food to all Mainers of all backgrounds? And so in sort of the same vein is how do we nourish folks with foods that they feel at home eating. And so for the Afghan refugees, for instance, they're arriving here, they're currently trying to transition to stable housing in hotels. We're working working with immigrant organizations to say, here's some money, some funds, go purchase the foods, cook the meals that are appropriate for them, and that helps to ease them and integrate them into the main society.
Well, I can agree that when you're a refugee and you've been here a few months, I believe that you need something to ease them into American society.
Yeah, but I appreciate your story about your Greek ancestors, though, because we can today we wouldn't have the Jimmy the Greeks, the Greek restaurants, the gyros. For the Italian immigrants, we wouldn't have Amados, we wouldn't have spaghetti and meatballs and pizza. Had it not been for the waves of immigrants that came.
Exactly. So make sure to go to the Greek pizza joint in your neighborhood and have a Greek pizza. Well, I got you here because I'm curious about the Charter Commission. You're an elected member of the Charter Commission. I read things and I hear things. And so you can kind of give us the right scoop because I'm probably wrong about some things. Where does it stand now? Maybe you're going to have a report this year?
We are on track so far, assuming that no one throws any curveballs, which as a seasoned political veteran, you know curveballs can come. We are statutorily, we're supposed to have a report to the council by early June.
Early June.
Early June, the preliminary report by early March. And so we split off into various committees. I happen to be the chair of the elections committee, and we have all been working on developing proposals to not to get them to sort of shipshape or perfect form, but to get some coalescing around some agreed upon language or ideas, bullet points, to then move on to the full commission. And that's where we are right now is.
Okay, so your subcommittees will push stuff to the full committee.
Yes.
Full committee will decide whether to adopt the recommendation.
Yep.
It will then go to the Portland City Council,
Yep.
presumably in June.
Yep.
The City Council will debate some of these things, or just send it out to the voters?
I think they will hold some public hearings, so it'll get into the eyes of the public some more. But then I think they have to put it onto the ballot in some form or fashion, not inconsistent with the spirit of what the Charter Commission is trying to achieve.
So the Charter Commission is the result of a referendum.
Yes.
And so people said, well, we need to change things in the city of Portland.
Yeah.
And some people that say, why do we need to change things?
Yeah.
Functions pretty well. There are people who say, no, we don't think it functions
Yeah.
very well. So now we're going to have change proposed.
So that is the narrative that certain people are trying to push who have an agenda. But initially, the Charter Commission started off when the League of Women Voters proposed a clean elections language for the charter. But then Corporation Counsel, now interim city manager Danielle West, her recommendation to the council was that this would require charter revision, which would require a charter commission. So therefore, we need to put a question forward.
Okay, so the catalyst was clean elections.
It was clean elections, correct?
Okay.
But it's amazing how fast the story can change when there's an agenda being pushed out there. And you and I both know that there's movement in terms of people wanting to completely eradicate the position of city manager. And that has something that has started on clean elections has now warped and morphed into basically a referendum on the city manager position. So I thought you would appreciate that analysis.
I think that's important to information, that it started small with the catalyst, clean elections, and a lot of us are for clean elections.
Yeah.
And then you now have several different committees, and you have a governance committee, which is talking about recommendations to change the government structure from a council manager style of government to a strong mayor. We have a mayor, a stronger mayor. And I understand, so that I can plant the seed to get this discussion on this going, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that some of the suggestions are to give the mayor more power over the budget, that instead of the manager, the professional city manager, building the budget and then giving it to the council to debate, that it would be the mayor's responsibility to build the budget.
Yeah.
Is that one of the things?
Yes, that's one of the items listed in the governance committee's proposal that they voted on, was to have the mayor take the first stab at a budget with the support of the city manager, and then from there outline a budget process where the council gets input. So the city manager isn't completely written out of that equation. The city manager supports the mayor in developing a budget.
With respect to the budget building in the city of Portland, is there a problem that the commission or some people on the commission see that needs to be corrected?
I think a lot of us ran on the issue of accountability and transparency, which is always good in politics and public policy. The way the previous budget process worked was, I'm a little rusty on the details because I did campaign on this, but it would start sometime in November, and then the city manager would get budget requests and proposals from the different departments. He would clobber it together, and then until March and April, then he would present it to the council finance committee, and then finally in May it would get presented to the council, and then the council votes on the budget before the fiscal year ends. And so there's about a 5-month period where a lot of the budget components are being put together by administrators. And some may say that that's efficient, that's the way it should be done. But at the same time, when the budget all of a sudden shows up in the council finance committee in March or April, and then in the council in May, the public then, and it has to be voted on in sometime in June or end of May, the public feels like it's been left out of a huge deal, a huge document. A budget is a policy document. We were talking about Joe Biden earlier, and he loves to say, show me your budget, I'll show you your priorities, policy priorities. And so building a more public access and accountability, having a mayor and the council be involved in the budgeting way in advance helps, like in the legislature, to know what's going into that budget, what's being left out, what's being put on the table.
Okay, another, and I don't know, again, I'm not sure I'm correct.
You might have figured out I like process, though.
Yeah, well, a lot of people like process. I've been around politicians my whole life. They like process.
Yeah.
And so another is that the mayor be the lead person in dealing with economic development projects, that the mayor represent the city in dealing with people who propose economic development activities in Portland. Is that another one of them?
I might have glazed over that one, but I know there were some suggestions from certain groups and certain commissioners that the mayor have the power to, which I don't agree with, the power to award contracts.
Yeah.
For me, if we're worried about corruption in the city manager's office, to give a politically elected official the power to award contracts with or without council approval is bringing us back to the old days of 1800s strong mayor systems and Tammany halls. And
you are an educated man. You know that? You are an educated man, because that is true. Yeah. And I also understood that one of the commission members suggested that in New England, well, provided a list of cities that have strong mayors, and it said in New England there are, I think there were 3 cities mentioned as potential models that your commission should talk to and see. Bridgeport, Connecticut. Bridgeport, Connecticut. I don't know how many people here are familiar with Bridgeport, Connecticut, but here's an article from this year, just a couple months ago, from a Connecticut newspaper. Connecticut keeps ignoring fraud and failure in Bridgeport. For 100 years, mayors have been going to jail. Bridgeport mayors have been going to jail because of corruption, because they award contracts, because they're the people that you see if you want to build something. Yeah. And so that's model. I was actually shocked when I read this. Yeah. Here's one. The second one, city mentioned, was Providence. And here's an article about Buddy Cianci, who did some time. He was in charge. He was the mayor, a longtime mayor. And if you wanted to have a contract with the city, if you wanted to build something, you greased Buddy's hand and it got done.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Manchester, I think, is fine. I've known some mayors of Manchester, and that's fine. And I don't think they give contracts. But you're right. You're educated, and you know the history of how strong mayors control doing business with the city. And the other thing I would say, now I'm giving myself a platform. but the other thing I would say is, one time I went to a meeting being conducted with a prior mayor of Portland 4 or 5 years ago, and it was to get people to bid on various city-controlled parcels of land in Bayside.
Yep.
And the mayor made a talk about how we need affordable housing and how we need to make sure that these people build affordable housing and so forth. And I listened to the talk, and I said, he's a nice guy, but he knows nothing about economics. I was shocked, actually. College graduate, knew nothing about economics. What he's explaining to them is how we're going to get affordable housing. And I said, he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. There are ways to get affordable housing, but not the way he's explaining it.
Yeah.
So putting that power to make economic deals in a mayor is dangerous, and you just said it. Another one is having a chief of staff for the mayor. So I understood this one was, and you correct me if I understand it wrong, is the mayor would be the chief executive, and then there would be not a city manager, but an administrator, a city administrator, who would deal with department heads and deal with the nuts and bolts of the city, but no policy proposals. And then, in addition to the city administrator, there would be a chief of staff. I always love that because I've been around politics a long time. Chief of staff, that's empire building. And my president that I worked for, Lyndon Johnson, refused to call anybody chief of staff. He said, I don't want any one of my staffers to have that much power to be called chief of staff.
Yeah.
But we've had it ever since in most administrations.
Yeah.
So is that true, that there would be, proposal is that there would be these layers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there would be layers. The chief of staff, I would have to hear more beyond the bullet points provided in the proposal.
Yeah.
Is billed as being the liaison between the mayor, the council, and the department heads and the city manager. Apparently, what's a little confusing to me is there's another proposal for an elected public advocate who would basically do the same thing, sort of be a sounding board and keep an eye on advocate for constituents. For me, I think a chief of staff who serves as sort of an executive assistant of the mayor, and helps to keep communication going between the council and the mayor, so that they're continuing to collaborate, as well as facilitating in some aspects communication to the departments, is good, but there is a point where it could go too far, where the chief of staff could become a mini mayor. And so the devil's going to be in the details. And right now we don't have too many details on what the chief of staff might accomplish. But what I want to aim for is I don't believe in concentrating too much power into one individual, which is what I worry about with going too far towards a strong mayor position. Yes, let's make the mayor's position stronger in some areas, especially around making the budget a little bit more public. But at the same time, what I think the charter, the role of the charter is about checks and balances. I think the other part that's been forgotten is that in some ways the council has acquiesced power to the city manager, the person that they hire to manage the day-to-day operations. And as I'm sure you know, where there's a power vacuum, someone's going to fill it. And when the council is not assertive enough and it takes a step back and defers too much, then and the mayor, might happen to be a clown. Did I just say that?
Happens in cities all over the country.
Someone's going to fill that position, and the city manager, I think, filled that position, that void.
You are absolutely correct, because you can't plan on. There are people who get elected who are clowns. They get elected.
Yeah.
And now you give them all that power.
We had 4 years of one at the top of the food chain there, the federal, the president there.
That's true. I agree with that. So, all of these people, this bureaucracy, there's some proposal about paying them, putting them on salary with benefits. So that would include the counselors and.
Yeah, so the counselors already get a stipend. I forget how much. I want to say 6,000.
Yeah, I think it's 6,000.
Somewhere around there. And I think there is some movement and some room for an increase there. Counselors.
What would be? What's the rationale for paying them? I mean, we pay state legislators 6,000 a year or something.
I think that number's actually gone up.
Might be 10.
Yeah,
I think it's 10 in the full year and 6 in the off year.
It might be
something.
that.
I think it's combined over 2 years, 16,000.
Yeah. So Maine is a volunteer state for the most part, with the exception of that amount of money that they pay legislators and counselors. But there is a benefit to paying elected officials. Not huge salaries, mind you, but something that's fair. And from counselors, both progressive, moderate, centrist counselors that I've talked to, they ran and they started the job thinking it was only going to be part-time, which is how it's billed in the city charter. They're not asked to be full-time counselors, but they're spending, on top of their full-time jobs, they're spending another 40 hours or so doing constituent work, doing policy development. Mark Dion, a friend of both of ours, I'm sure, him and I were on the phone when I was talking to him about running for the Charter Commission, and the day I called him, he had booked that entire day to look at the needle exchange policy and to research it and to go through it. And the council doesn't have someone to do policy research for them. Like legislators, they have their aides, and those aides are stretched thin among 10 legislators. So compensating them more, I think, has been on the mind of a lot of different counselors, both past and present, in recognition that this job, because of how complex the issues are that the city deals with, things like the mask mandate, things like vaccines, public health. No one on the council, I don't think, is a public health expert, but they're forced.
But be careful, and I know you will, because I've been around a lot of state legislators, and the ones that have staffs, ultimately they say, okay, you gave me more money, but I get all this constituent work. I get all this. I need to develop policy. I need 3 assistants.
Yeah.
And then each legislator gets 3 assistants. And then they get a separate office.
Yeah.
And then they have their own little thing. And those are the states where they get indicted because they have their own little mini power palaces. Yeah. And So I think you said it earlier. You got to be careful about
Yeah.
concentrating power in people
Yeah.
because power corrupts.
It does.
And you said it. I think you're right.
Yeah, the
And
key
other-
is checks and balances.
Yeah,
Which is
and of course somebody, and I sense after talking to you, you probably asked the question along the line, and I'm sure others will on your commission. Okay, we got to tell the public how much this is going to cost, and because do we have to raise taxes
Yeah.
to do all of this stuff? Because that's part of transparency. That
Yeah.
the public, and you've implied that, and I'm sure there's others on the commission who will agree that you got to talk about the cost of it all. You're on the elections committee.
correct.
So what is the elections committee? Where are they headed?
As the chair of the elections committee, I decided to. The role of the chair, as I've defined it, is someone who facilitates what goes on. Not necessarily someone who says, no, you can't do that. Yes, you can do that. But to make sure that the process is as thorough as possible given the time frame we have. So there are three major proposals that we've been looking at is clean elections, number one, universal resident voting, or otherwise known as non-citizen voting, and then the third one is eventually proportional ranked choice voting, which would be a fix for the issue we had in the Charter Commission election, and also the council makeup in terms of redistricting. And fortunately, that has taken up a lot of our time, so it hasn't given us any
There
more
was
time.
one
to think
somebody
about
took,
this. Yeah.
setting up an office in City Hall, an office of elections.
Yes, so there's two versions of that. There's one, Commissioner Buxton in her clean elections proposal has proposed creating an office to administer the clean elections program, and
So that's another bureaucracy.
yeah. Which my feedback on that was that state law directs that the city clerk is the elections administrator for the city. If anything were to, if any office was to be created, it should be created under that umbrella. The other separate proposal that I came up with was, knowing that the city clerk's office has been so strained, me and the city clerk, Catherine Jones, we're talking, and people treat elections as this one whole thing that should all be administered by one office. But there's the administration part, administering elections, but then there's the education and outreach part. And the clerk's office is very focused on making sure elections run smoothly, all those different types of things. And so my proposal for an elections commission of volunteers, of people in the city, appointed by the council, would support the city clerk and do the public outreach, the education piece, the community engagement piece, so that
They would not be paid city employees.
they would not be paid city employees.
Well, you said, and you mentioned something
Yeah.
a minute ago. You said, look, there's a lot of state law about elections, and I didn't know what you were going to say, but you said it because you're a graduate of law school, and I brought this asset. 400 pages of Maine state law on how to conduct the elections. So when I heard about, well, they want to have some oversight committee on elections, I thought, gee, but boy, it's just like Trump. Trump says, oh, these clerks do a terrible job on elections. We got to change the system. We got to change the laws because these clerks can't handle these elections. They get all screwed up, and great people like me get cheated out of an election, says Trump. And this, you got to be careful.
Yeah.
That I think our elections in Maine are pretty good.
Yeah.
And I don't see a lot of problems. And I think Trump has suggested that there's something wrong with our election system, but
The anniversary is tomorrow of the January 6th attack.
Yeah. And here we are. We have 400 pages of state law. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you about universal, the people wouldn't have to be citizens to vote.
Yes.
That's an interesting issue. I guess, in other words, the Afghan, what is the idea? If you're a refugee, you've come to Portland, you're not a citizen, you should be able to vote in the election?
Yeah, so I support the idea, but again, devil's in the details. Where I have put where I've suggested some more time be spent on the issues that we need to make sure that immigrants, asylum seekers, refugees are protected and their privacy is protected because, and their safety as well, because it's illegal for them to vote in federal elections. And
It's illegal for them to vote in Maine elections for governor, for instance.
Exactly.
The Constitution of Maine says U.S. citizens. So you might have some, I just throw this out, we're both lawyers. You might have some issues about the Maine Constitution.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues. That's what we've been dealing with. And unfortunately, Attorney Katsifikis from
Jensen Baird
has been advising the committee and the commission. There is the friction between municipal, state, and federal government. And so the argument for non-citizen voting, universal resident voting is let's not think about the citizenship question. Let's think about if you are in Portland, living in Portland, and you can prove residency, should you have a voice on the issues around school funding, around land use, around whether an Airbnb can pop up next to your apartment, and then a bunch of college partiers can disrupt you and your family. That's what the discussion has centered around is should people who are residents of the city, holding off the question of citizenship altogether, should they be able to have a say in their government in terms of being able to vote for the councilors who will approve, say, an Airbnb right next to their or an Airbnb policy.
But they're not. These people can vote if they become citizens.
They can, but the thing that the immigration process currently, the immigration system is broken, and the backlog is increasingly piling up, and it takes 10 or more years to actually become a citizen, even if you have a green card. And that's just because of chronic underfunding, administrative law judges being over or under-resourced and understaffed.
But it's a national problem.
It's a national problem.
It's not just the city of Portland. It's a national problem. Yeah.
And so understanding that it's illegal for immigrants to vote in federal elections, illegal for them to vote in state elections, can we carve out sort of a municipal voting regime, I guess you can call it, where they can get a taste of what's to come, and they want to be citizens, and so if they learn how to vote in a municipality, if they learn how to vote for local issues, for candidates of city council and school board, for different things like that, then that builds civic pride in their community.
Marpheen, I'm interested in what you have to say because you're making some very good points. But building civic pride, look, all my relatives were naturalized, became citizens, all of them. And they didn't need to have practice on how to vote. They wanted to become citizens so they could vote. It was an incentive for them to vote. So I'm saying there are two sides to this discussion.
Are two sides.
There are two sides to it. And so, and I'm sure that you all will consider both sides. And so will the public, because ultimately, whatever you decide
has to be voted on by the public.
It has to pass muster with a majority of the voters. So it becomes important to kind of debate these things. Obviously, you agree with that. All right, so those are some of the voting things. The other the other issues are what? Well, you got elections, you've got governance.
We've got a departments committee, we've got a procedures committee, and we have an education committee.
Are you on the education committee?
I am, yeah.
Well, what does the education committee do?
We we had a lot of ideas starting out, but the interesting piece that has come up is both a memo from Drummond Woodsum and a memo from Attorney Katsafikis, both opining on the role that state law plays in terms of guiding a school board and how a school budget gets on the ballot. And so initially there were some ideas about, can we further bifurcate the two? But then as research and interviews and fact-finding often does, it changes your mind about some aspects of a proposal. And so instead of ripping the two bodies apart, school board separate, city council separate, how can we make them collaborate and have more joint sessions that offer the school board more beneficial feedback from the council and offers the council more assurance that there aren't going to be any surprises in terms of...
So this would, I would imagine when this started, the idea was, how can we just have the school board decide what the school budget is and keep the city council out? Now it's morphed a little into...
It's morphed a little. And I think that's why a public process and a thought process that involves fact-finding, granted we were under a very short time frame, allows for good policy to come forward.
And I imagine the lawyers said to the commission, look, the school board doesn't have the power to levy a tax. And so now you're giving this power to the school board, and you say, you, the school board, are the final arbiter of how much tax, the property tax payers in Portland will pay, and I think that's the problem.
Yeah. And a systemic issue is that so much of the city's funds come from property taxes, which are a regressive tax, and as a Democrat, as a liberal saying this, I think we need to be careful when we say there are a lot of folks that show up and say, I'm willing to pay the extra property tax for this or that in school funding or for city funding, but they forget that the property tax is not a progressive tax. It's a very regressive tax that penalizes working class, middle class, especially hard. The seniors that are living out in North Deering that can't afford the $6,000 to $10,000 property tax bill, and they're living off Social Security or their pension. And so I think the conversation around property tax they've been trying to talk about it as if it's the income tax or it's a state tax, but it's not the same at the local level. It's the only tax base that the cities are relying on, in addition to some grant funds and
it's
some things
pretty
like that.
much the sole source, other than what the federal government or the state gives them or what they get in fees, and the fees are generated by state law. Other than that, the property tax is the pump that runs, that produces the money for the city of Portland. You're right, and it's people in neighborhoods who pay it.
And we talk a lot about equity these days and diversity, and there was a report about the black homeownership rate being the lowest or the same as it was back when the Fair Housing Act was passed. And we have to think about that too. If a black, brown, or indigenous person wants to buy a home in Portland, Maine, will they be able to afford the $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 property tax bill, depending on where they're living. And so if we truly care about equity and diversity, not only thinking about zoning and land use and housing issues from that perspective, but also we want Black and brown people to have the same opportunities to own a home and to live in Portland. But if well-meaning progressive white folks are saying, I'm willing to pay that extra property tax, they're driving that up. And I don't think they realize the impact that has on lower income people who do want a piece of the American dream, who do want that house, that white picket fence. Granted, single family zoning might not be around in the future, but having that home that they can say they bought, they invested in, that they're building equity in, that they're using that to then send their kids off to college. A lot of people are missing out on the opportunity because we have this idea, we don't want to balance priorities. And we don't want to, people would rather come up to me and say, like, you're so conservative for talking about property tax and not wanting to go up. It's like, it's a regressive tax.
You're so conservative, but you're talking about people who live in the community in these neighborhoods who go to the work every day and they have a house and they want to have a house and they want to own something. And for most people in our country, that is the sole asset that they own, besides a car, is a house. And so it's really a basis of our country. Let me ask you, what about the police? I read in the newspaper that there was concern about the police and oversight of the police and so forth. Is there a problem with the Portland police? Do they talk about it? I don't know of the problem.
So there have been some headlines about the Portland police. Chance Baker, I believe, was one of them, who was dealing with mental health issues and had a toy gun or something and ended up getting shot. Things like that, and of course the Black Lives Matter movement last summer or 2 summers ago. And
but that wasn't a Portland-directed. I mean, Black Lives Matter. I mean, is there a problem with how Portland police deal with black people as opposed to white people?
So the ACLU actually released some data and statistics on that, and it's disproportionate in terms of the population of the black
Of
community.
arrests?
Of arrests. So there is data available through the ACLU. But when what Black Lives Matter was talking about was systemically across the country, the role of police departments has greatly expanded. Now there's militarization of the police with surplus military equipment.
I agree with you.
So-
They have tanks and
So, but that's to say that there is some work that can be done. The Portland Police Department was one of the first police departments to sort of lead the way on community policing. And so, but systemically, how police departments operate and different things like that, the diversity of police departments is a big issue. There's some work, but
there's some things for you to look into. I want you to look into something for me. My law office is in a big building here in Portland, and the security guy was telling me, I went to have a sandwich, and he was there, and he was telling me they just got through. There's a guy that was stalking a woman who worked down in the food court, and he says he's done it before. And this guy went to. He said, "Get out of the building." I won't. So he called the police. And the policeman came, and he said to the security guy, we don't deal with this anymore. We won't deal with this. And so the guy says, there's nothing I can do. So there are policies now that have changed in the wake of public pressures for reform, which will lead to not protecting people. And the final thing I want to ask you, because we got to wrap this up, but we got.
You sure you don't want to go another hour?
I would go another hour with you. We have to do this again. We'll do it again. But the real problem, we have, what we really need to spend money is not on bureaucrats, not on staff. I'm now making my political statement, but on doing something about the homeless and doing something about mental illness. That's what's happening on our streets. It's mental illness. These people are sick. They need help, and we need to take care of them as a society. But there doesn't seem to be that kind of emphasis, and I don't see Progressive Portland, and I know that's not your group, but I don't see them, for instance, saying, look, this is where the problem is, and here's what we propose you can do about it to help the people who are mentally ill. They're killing themselves on the streets every day. It's going on around my building. I see them shooting up heroin in the building. What do the police say? We just stay away. We stay away.
And I think that's part of the thing too is not forcing the police department to be
they shouldn't be the social workers.
And you and I probably both agree that the previous gubernatorial administration took away a lot of funding from mental health treatment and drugs assistance.
You won't get me defending that guy.
So I think Governor Mills has done a great amount of work trying to stop the bleeding at least and move on. But I think Maine just needs to invest more, like you said, in more homeless services and substance
I just think that, they talk about identity politics, and I could agree that is a problem. When I criticize people on the left, I want to put it in context. I criticize people on the right much more because I'm a student of history, and I understand what's happened throughout the world with these movements from the right and sometimes from the left. But the ones in the left that cause the problems, they end up acting like they're, acting as authoritarians. And that's where the real problem is, authority.
And that's why I was very clear when I was running that I was running as a pragmatic progressive.
Pragmatic, my friend. You are pragmatic. I've listened to you. You are pragmatic. I want to thank you very much for coming. The hour has gone too quickly. We will do it again. We'll catch up.
All right. I appreciate it.
And now we're off, but we can chat. We'll